Right, hey up folks, it's the Bingley wheeler again. And just there I was hanging back because the way that lady had been driving before I actually switched the camera on led me to believe that there was every chance she would roll back at that junction, so that's why I was hanging back. Frightening place at times. So another bright morning, just on the far side of Keighley, making my way up towards Haworth, because what I'm going to do today is just show you a little treat of a quick run over to a little town called Todmorden, which is about as far west as you can get in West Yorkshire before you're actually in the sort of Lancashire, Greater Manchester area. And the route I'm going to take is from here at Keighley, and this is the Halifax road, and at the top of this road I'll be turning right, and that's the road into Haworth, and then I'll be turning left, going through a little village called Oxenhope, and then I'll be going over the moors down into Hebden Bridge. And those of you with a degree of local knowledge and interest will be aware that Hebden Bridge is a town that suffered terribly with flooding a few years ago, around about Christmas time. I remember shots of the local court there being well underwater, and we'll be passing that. And then from Hebden Bridge we'll just be taking the road out towards Todmorden. But the run over the tops, it's a cracking run, great views over typical Yorkshire moorland, Bronte country essentially, which is entirely appropriate because of its proximity to Haworth, obviously the home of the Bronte sisters. And I am today on my beloved 2008 Yamaha XJR 1300 with all of 9,000 miles on the clock. Had this bike a couple of years now, and over that time I've gradually added bits and bats, and mainly chrome embellishments, and these red anodised brake levers, and what you can't see is I'm sat on a red leather seat, because I think the combination of black paintwork, red leather and chrome, whether it's on a motorcycle or on a car, is iconic, and it just reminds me of when I was a child back in the 60s and 70s and had a real interest in cars. We never had a car, we couldn't afford it. Don't get the violin out, but you know, I'm from Yorkshire working class stock, and it was long enough before we had a colour television, and that was rented. Lived in a little terrace house in a place called Thornbury in Bradford. But there was a real sense of community, and everybody looked after everybody else, and there were relatives on the same street, and friends on the same street, and during the school holidays there were no issues around being vulnerable or indeed having any opportunity to misbehave, because everybody was keeping a close watching brief whilst mum and dad were at work. But we never had a car, and that may well be why I had quite an obsessive interest with cars. I had an incredible collection of toy dinky cars, which were my favourite, and corgis, which were like a second class dinky, and if we were a bit skint one week I had to put up with a matchbox. But anyway, the cars I remember most vividly were the polished black and chrome cars with the red leather interiors. I'm thinking of things like the Hillman Humbers, Rover P5s, Rover P5B, Rover P6, Rover P6B. What else were there? There were the Austin 1100s, 1300s and 1800s. There was the big Austin 3 litre V6, if memory serves, or was it a straight 6? The big Triumph 2 litre and 2.5 PIs. Absolute classic cars. But my favourite colour combination was always the black cars with the red leather. And so this bike is a little bit of a nod to that, really. And if you look, at my channel, you'll see I've done another video which essentially is just an overview of the embellishments that I've added over the last couple of years. Some purely cosmetic and some mainly functional, and some a bit of both. I think one thing that I forgot to mention on that particular video, please have a look at it if you're interested in this bike, are these polished stainless steel reservoir caps on the clutch and brake reservoir. So I didn't mention those, but those are an addition. The rest of the stuff I've covered, and I'm pleased to say I've now got heated grips, which were the Oxford retro heated grips, which came free with a year's subscription to MCN. And I was buying MCN weekly in any case, so to be able to get a year's subscription at a discounted rate and £80 worth of Oxford heated grips thrown in, with a choice of 3 designs, one of which was retro, which is exactly what this bike is. What an absolute bargain, so thanks MCN. Prima. So I've fitted those, and the handguards are off my KTM 1290 Super Adventure S because I exchanged them for orange ones, and serendipity is a wonderful thing. I've probably tried 2 or 3 different handguards that I've sort of bought at knockdown prices off eBay and not managed to get any of them to fit because of the way the bar ends go in this bike. But lo and behold, because the KTM handguards use an expanding bolt system, these fitted perfectly. So that's a real unplanned result. But I just love this bike because these were made from the late 90s, and in fact was still being made up to last year. I don't know about this year, but last year in calf racer form. And they've sort of evolved a bit, but basically stayed the same motorcycle engine and overall design over the years. But it's a retro naked muscle bike basically. But what I love about it, sort of over the KTM Super Adventure and the BMW GS Adventure, which I have, is that it's so compact, and you could almost call it a TARDIS bike. In as much as you wouldn't believe it's a 1300cc motorcycle, but it's very compact. But this one's absolutely mint. Only ever comes out in decent weather. And I'm one of those sad people that probably spends as much time polishing the bike as riding it in the case of this particular motorcycle. But I think it's a classic. I mean, the other bikes of its time of this genre were the Suzuki GSX 1400, cracking bike, the Honda CB 1300, and Kawasaki did one, and I can't quite bring to mind which one that was, but they were all essentially, I think, the first time in the modern era of motorcycles that retro styling came in. I mean, now it's all the rage. The Triumph are on the bandwagon with all their Scrambler variants and the Bonnevilles and what have you. BMW with the R9T, and you know, other makes like Ducati that make scrambler bikes, and they're all a nod basically to the heady days of motorcycling in the 60s and 70s. But I think that retro styling movement did start with these bikes in the late 90s. So this is a 2008. I mean, when the XJR 1300 first came out, there were two models. There was a standard model and the SP model. And the SP model had the Olin shocks and other bits and bats. And then at some point in the mid-2000s, I think it was, those two bikes were consolidated into the one bike, which was effectively an SP model, which this is. So this does have the Olin suspension. And I've not tinkered with it, but it's firm but competent is how I would describe it. So that was Oxenhoe we just came through. My hands are getting a little bit chilly now, so we'll have a bit of heated grips going on, I think. And these Oxford heated grips, when you first press the button, they come on to full, and then you can sort of knock them back with this minus button here. Trouble is, you've got to take your hands off the handlebar like that. Anyway, there's nobody behind me. Okay, so that is typical Cathy and Heathcliff moorland. As I say, Haworth is over there by that reservoir. You can see it. I don't know if you can, the drift is picking it up, but Haworth is just across the valley there. Now the other thing I have to be conscious of on this bike, apart from remembering to use the clutch, because of course the KTM has the quick shifter and auto blipper, is that you have to consciously make an effort to bank into bends. And with the KTM Super Adventure and the BMW GS, they've got sublime handling and the merest thought of a bend, and they just tuck in with the minimum of effort. But you've actually got to think about it with this bike and use your body mass and centre of gravity to actually coerce the bike round the bend. So I don't go mad on this. But there's a YouTube video, and it's Cal Crutchlow riding one of these at absolute meltdown somewhere, knee down on every corner. Yeah, I'd be terrified of going anywhere near that sort of riding with this. So I'm quite content just to bimble along with this particular bike. So look at that. You know, and this is 20 minutes from where I live. It's a great undersung part of the world, I think. I mean, the profile around here has been raised quite a bit lately, particularly with the Tour de Yorkshire and the cycling and what have you. So these grips are warming up nicely now. Makes a big difference. And when I rode this bike in similar weather to this earlier last year when it was still chilly, and I didn't have the handguards on, and I didn't have the heated grips, and I actually did get a tiny bit of frostbite in my left pinky, which went eventually, but that's how cold it was. And of course, as you know, when your hands start warming up, it's absolute agony. But there, that's spectacular, isn't it, you know? And this is 10 minutes out of Keighley. So yeah, if you get a chance and you're interested in this bike, because I've had a couple of nice comments already about my earlier coverage of the XJR, just have a look at that latest upload, and you'll what I've tried to do is show you in relative close-up, sort of keep my fat face out of the frame as much as possible. Show you in relative close-up some of the work that I've done, some of the things that I've added, but I've also shown in the subtitles what they are and where they came from. So imagine living there. I mean, these are farmsteads, I'm assuming, but what a view! What a view if you live there. Some people are so lucky, and I do wonder if they just appreciate just how lucky they are. I mean, fair enough, if they're working farms, that's great, that's part of the country's infrastructure, very important. But a lot of these farms have been sold to wealthy people, and what a privilege to be able to live somewhere like that. Now, interesting with these heated grips, I was going to take the bike to my indie mechanic, Steve Dale at Steeton. Brilliant fella, and I was going to ask him to fit them, because I had it in mind that they should be really wired into the ignition so that they can't be inadvertently left on and flatten the battery. But I did a bit of reading, and apparently it's quite an intelligent system that they operate, and they can detect, and I don't know how, but apparently they can detect if they've been inadvertently left on, and they switch themselves off after a period of time. I'm not entirely sure what kind of technology is employed to bring that about, but anyway. And I'd seen quite a few videos on YouTube where people had fitted them and just wired them directly to the battery, so that's what I've done. But I will make a conscious effort to actually turn the things off. I don't want to find out the hard way whether or not that technology does actually work. But they are lovely and warm. And very straightforward to fit. I just cut the old ones off, wired up the harness to the battery, and then you just put some glue around the outside of the bar and the throttle sleeve on the right hand side. Pop your grips on, position them so the cable's in the right position, particularly on the throttle side where there's movement, and that cable can't be allowed to snag. So once you've actually done that, it's 24 hours for the glue to cure, I bet it's quicker than that actually, because it was a tube of super glue, cyanoacrylate, that was provided. But anyway, left it overnight and it's been absolutely fine. So they were very, very straightforward to fit, as was the control module there, which just bolts under the mirror. So if you do get MCN regularly, and but you haven't actually committed to an annual subscription, I did notice a couple of weeks ago the offer's still on, and I would absolutely recommend it, because these things are 80 quid in the shops and you're getting them for free. You know, it's brilliant. So we're dropping down into the Calder Valley now, into Hebden Bridge. A lovely little town. And we'll go through the centre of Hebden Bridge. I'll show you that co-op that was flooded, and it's had the complete refurbishment with the new co-op livery, etc. So it's to be hoped that doesn't suffer a similar and repeated fate at some point. They really did have a bad time around here. But when you sort of look at the general topography around the valley, you can just see how excess water is going to come cascading down these hillsides, and Hebden Bridge it's effectively a plug hole, and so it really does suffer if there's prolonged, sustained heavy rain. Thank you, sir. You see, I have this theory that a lot of motorists now are savvy about helmets with cameras on, and I think they afford a lot of courtesy which would not otherwise have been afforded, and that may be a cynical view, but I don't think it's entirely without its evidence. And another thing that's slightly annoying, and this really speaks to a greater truth, which is about the vulnerability of motorcyclists and the limited extent to which car drivers understand and respect that fairly obvious principle. If I mean, all motorcyclists will know if you're riding along and there is an obstruction to oncoming traffic, oncoming cars, such as a slow-moving vehicle or a peloton of cycles or whatever, horse. Obviously, if the oncoming vehicle, from the perspective of the vehicles behind the obstruction, are cars or commercial vehicles, then they can't get past and they have to stay put. But they seem to think if it's a motorcycle that they can squeeze the way past, oh, it's only a motorcycle, and they make an assumption, and there's like an unreasonable expectation that you're going to pull right into the near side so that they can crack on with the journey. Now, I tend to think that those people should absolutely be treating oncoming motorcycles in those circumstances as if it was a car or a commercial vehicle, and not taking advantage of the fact that it's a motorcycle. And any thoughts on that would be greatly appreciated. I'd hate to think it's my entrenched views that were unreasonable. But it does annoy me when people do that and, just come battling on ahead of you and oblige you to move to the near side. So this is the main street through Hebden, and this is the co-op coming on the left, and you can imagine all of this under several feet of water, which it was, and all these businesses here were badly affected, and it took them many months to get back on the feet. But there was obviously a great deal of what would you call it, war spirit or whatever, but a coming together of community effort in the face of adversity to, you know, to get things back on an even keel again. Absolute credit to these people. So be a few bikes out today, I expect, and scooters. Yeah,